reasons for optimism? What makes you feel optimistic when you think about the year ahead? Cheer us all up, please.
Well, I'll certainly try. In our house, we've not, I mean, I always take the Christmas decorations down on the 31st because I don't take an old year into a new year. It's a weird thing that I do. Yeah. And, you know, this
bad luck as well, isn't it? It's supposed to be bad luck.
Yeah, I just think, like, I know some people do it, you know, in ways. I just don't take an old year into a new year. And quite frankly, I was quite happy to see the back of this last year. But my kids were like, no, we're having the Christmas tree up still, Mum. And they've carried the tradition on. So the Christmas decorations are still up in our house. But, you know, we were all promised that, do you remember at the start of this, and no one could have foreseen back this time last year that we'd be in this circumstance, and we were just hearing this thing about this virus that was in Wuhan, and none of us really saw what was coming. But we were all told in March, when we realised how dangerous, and we saw those scenes from Italy, that we'd be all right by now. So I think that was a big psychological blow for everyone, I think, because people thought that by the time we got to this next year, things will be improved. And then when we saw the scenes over Christmas, and we've seen what the NHS and our wonderful staff have been having to do, and the peak and the infection rates rising again, it's just been, oh my God, and everyone's been devastated. And it's rubbish weather as well. You know, it's not summer, is it? So it does mean that people have taken this one really hard, and I have as well, and like everybody else. And one thing that's really sort of, on Monday, I went to the vaccine centre, Deborah, and to see the relief on the older people's faces, you know, when they were going in there and they were getting the jab. Some of them had not been out at all throughout the whole since March. And that you could see their shoulders drop, you know, you could see the level of, and that's our R&I, that's our research and innovation, that's our scientists that have done that. And if we can get this government to do one thing right and get the rollout of that vaccine as quick, it needs to be quicker than what they're saying. They're not on target at the moment. We need to really ramp it up. And I know our NHS and our volunteers are ready, and the community coming together. So those two things, really, the community coming together. I know my neighbours now like I've never known them before. You know, one is like suddenly realised the value of having people around you, who you live around you, and knowing who they are. And everyone appreciates our key workers and people more than they've ever done before. And I think getting that vaccine is just a real like treasure and a real hope. And I can't tell you how I've been phone banking today to my constituents, and the amount of them that have said they've had the jab and how they feel so optimistic by having that. I think that is the thing that's giving me hope at the moment.
I totally agree. Me too. I think the other thing that's giving me a bit of hope was, again, this is like a poll finding, a bit more cheerful than the one I just gave you, which was that in another piece of work that we did at Britain Thinks, we found that only 9% of people want the world to continue, want the country to continue as it was before the pandemic. So I feel there's a real sort of appetite for change. And, you know, you were talking about the key workers. I feel that everybody really appreciates essential workers. And I mean, I don't just mean like the NHS here. I mean, you know, the people that work in our supermarkets, the people that are running public transport. I think, you know, we've taken a whole group of people for granted, and I think we're not doing that anymore, and that's really, really, really important.
I recognise them now, Deborah. It's like, you know, the shop worker now. It's like, it's like, oh my God, you know, they've literally put their lives on the line to keep us fed. How important is food? People didn't realise about food insecurity and poverty that was going around. It's become more of an issue because people have recognised it. They see the bin man now and the bin lady different now. They see them, and they've seen them through all weathers there. And these people, the salt of the earth that have gone out and looked after us all this time, suddenly are more visible now than they've ever been before. And that to me has been so heartening at a time where people feel like, you know, people in positions of power do not see these people, and they've had to see them this time round, and they've had to understand how ordinary people's lives are. And it's not perfect, but I think, you know, there has been an awareness more so than ever before. Like I say, neighbours who never spoke to each other, suddenly you know who your neighbours are. And
and they're helping each other. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure like everybody, we've got a street WhatsApp. It's like, you know, there's a lady at number whatever who needs some help, needs some shopping, needs a prescription picking up, and people are kind of bailing in. And, you know, that is all to the good. So, Angela, the year ahead for Labour, what do you see as the real challenges that Labour faces? I mean, there's obviously the small matter of some elections that may or may not happen. I know you feel very strongly that they should. Government may have different ideas. What do you see as the main challenges?
Well, first of all, I think the elections absolutely should happen, Deborah. The Tories, if it doesn't happen, then it's their failure. They know that these elections were coming up. We've had elections internationally. There's no excuse. We can look at how we can do it: postal ballots, social distancing, or postal voting, whatever, over multiple days. There is no excuse in my eyes, and it's really important that we do that. But the main challenge, I think, and you hit it the nail on the head in your focus groups and some of the report back in your book, and it's that I did phone banks today, and people have said that they're still on the fence a bit about Kia. They see the Labour Party's changed, and they say, okay, so you're listening now, but they still don't know necessarily what we stand for. And the main thing, I think, for us as a Labour Party is to get that message over to the voters, not to patronise them and say you should have voted for us. Why didn't you vote the way we expected you to? If only you'd have listened to this, or if only we'd have done that. Is first of all is to recognise we lost, and we lost badly. That's really important, and it's very painful for us. Especially, I was in the shadow cabinet. I felt that we could have changed people's lives for the better with our platform, but we wasn't listening. Yeah. And that was the frustration for many of those voters. And we still haven't, we're in the room now. They're like, all right, okay, so who are you then? Yeah. And that's where I think I'm up to with the voters. And also the voters quite rightly have recognised that this is a global pandemic. Who would have thought we'd be where we are today? And therefore they're willing to give Boris Johnson more benefit of the doubt than ever before, because we all want him to succeed. I mean, it's weird.
We need him to succeed.
More in my life, honestly. And the whole nation wants the government to succeed. They really do, in a way that has never been before, because we've all come together as a nation, as the United Kingdom. We've never been more sort of like, right, come on, let's batten down the hatches, let's do this. So I think that's the challenge for us as an opposition, about how we can be constructive and angry, like I'm angry about the fact that the government have seeded the virus once and now they'll go out to do it again in our care homes, but equally about not just looking like we're harping on from the sidelines, and that we're trying to be constructive about it. And we want the government to succeed. Of course, we want them to succeed. So that's our challenge, really. It's about how we can be an effective opposition, and then how we can earn the respect so that people are giving us an opportunity to put our case to them. And I think that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you're right about needing to kind of introduce Labour to voters again, or reintroduce voters to Labour. So I was in some focus groups that I did just before Christmas. I asked people to sort of sum up the Labour Party in a few words. And the words they used most often were words like invisible, absent, quiet, reserved. And there's this sense that, as you say, in the room, but actually they don't know what Labour stands for. And there's a real need to to tackle that. How do you think Labour can do that?
Yeah, it's a challenge. And, not only that, they think they know what we stand for, but they think we stand for something that's not what they want and what they prioritise.
Yeah.
So that's the other problem, you see, because, and it's about the overall values and vision. So they're worried about security of their jobs, security of the country, security of the economy. And they're not sure whether or not we've got the tools to be able to make them feel safe in our hands, quite frankly. And that's not just about one leader. That's been something that I think has been deep rooted for a while. They think, of course you care about the NHS. Of course you care about the poor, because that's what Labour's values are. But what are you going to do for me? I'm a self-employed, or I'm somebody who's worked all my life. I've never claimed in my life, or I'm somebody who's trying to run a small business here. What are you doing for me? And we haven't been in that space, and we haven't created the space. And I think that's one of the things that Annalise did a great speech this week on the economy, and it wasn't moving away from our values, because I know other people think, well, if we just tack to the right a little bit, or we just tack to this, or to get the red wall seats, you've got to talk about that. And somehow that they're a different type to other people in other areas, like metropolitan areas and things like that. It's just baloney, actually. The core values of sticking up for everybody, sticking together, fairness, and all of those things, if we can put them in a modern day, because I think a lot of the time people see us in a sort of nostalgic way in the past, but they don't see what we see a vision for the 21st century is. So if we can start talking about it in a language and being there, and do you know what it's about being in our towns as well, right on the front line. And we've seen it. How many people on this call who are Labour people are volunteering, but they don't link the two?
Yeah.
They don't link the two. I do volunteering as well. You know, I'm volunteering at the moment as well, like a lot of people, and I'm just doing it because it's inherently what I do. You just roll your sleeves up and you do it, don't you? And a lot of people who are Labour people do that, but they don't link the two up, so that people don't see it as their activism. It's like they do the leaflet on a Saturday, and then the Monday to Friday stuff that they do in the food bank or, you know, at the church or anything is separate. And actually linking all of that together, which is about being a community, and people seeing that and seeing that work in that way, actually will root us back into the communities where we need to be, instead of it looking a bit holistic, like we've got an ideology, but we haven't got an implementation plan.
Do you think, though, when you think about what the task ahead is, do you feel that Labour has sufficiently well understood why it's lost 4 elections in a row?
No, I really, I don't think we did. We couldn't have, because we wouldn't have lost 4 elections in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, and there's been times where I felt patronised as a member of the Labour Party in a position. And, you know, it's been frustrating. And part of it is because we're almost paternalistic sometimes in the way we treat our voters. And it can't be like that. Just like the way we are with our nations, we can't be paternalistic in that way. We have to be a family, all with our peers, you know, respectful of each other. Yeah, we might have disagreements at times, but we're in it together. And that sense of being together, I don't think that came across. And actually, we were too busy looking at what we didn't agree on. So you go in and that's the difference between us and the Tories. You know, the Tories act like a family, and if they're under attack, they all come together and they sort of bed in. When, as the Labour Party, we're attacking each other. We don't even need someone to attack us from outside. We'll do the damage for ourselves, and I think that's been the problem, because we, you know, I do think it's a bit of a class issue as well, because I've always thought I'm not good enough. I think that's the same with the Labour Party. We just sometimes we articulate we're not good enough, but actually we don't look at the 90% of the stuff we achieve and we do really well. We're always looking at the 10% we felt we should have done better. And it's that mindset. And I think we've got to get into a mindset again of, you know, we can achieve things together. What have we achieved when we've been in government before? Not what did we not do, but what did we actually do? Like free school meals, like there wasn't food banks, like free education, like the open university, like Sure Start centres. All these things we did, we should really be talking about them and aspiring to build on that into the future. And then people will have a good feeling about us and will be able to sign up to that, rather than us saying, well, I didn't like what you did with that.
I think that's a really important point you just made, isn't it? So actually, when I knew I was doing this, I put a thing out on Twitter and said, has anybody got a question they'd like me to ask Angela when we have our conversation? And one person said exactly that, you know, how can we win if we won't celebrate, you know, some of the successes of a Labour government in the past? If all we're prepared to do is sort of slag it off and diss it, it's a little bit like trying to sort of, you know, say, buy this car. The last car we made was rubbish, but we fixed that. Yeah. You know, and I think that's just quite an important point, isn't it, to sort of celebrate some of the successes of the past as well as moving forward.
Absolutely. And none of us, we're not perfect, Deborah. I mean, that's the one thing about, I've always said, like, where I grew up, my parents weren't particularly good parents, and I don't mean that in a bad way to them. They didn't have the skills. My mum couldn't read or write. I grew up in poverty, but by today's standards, they had a council house and they had income support, so it wasn't quite as bad as some people today. But, you know, I look at that and I look at the Labour family, and one thing about the Labour Party back when I got involved as a young member was it accepted me for who I was. Even though I had a kid at 16, I needed welfare support at the time. And, you know, I'd not got my qualifications, I'd failed at school, so I'd been feeling a failure. But the Labour Party was speaking about me and speaking about me in a positive sense. So I felt there was a home there for me. At the moment, we're trying to, you know, label people and put people into brackets or into groups. and we're not a homogenous group. And the Labour Party's always been very broad for that reason. It's like, you're welcome. You're not perfect. None of us are. But
well, it's funny you should say that.
Try to make it better,
because one is, it's great that you felt that and you felt so welcomed. But, you know, in some of the research that I did in the Red Wall seats from my Red Wall book, and I mean, I think everybody acknowledges there's a particular problem. I mean, I was as shocked as anybody when we saw what happened last December, or December, you know, a year ago, with those Red Wall seats. One of the things that I found was that a lot of the people that I listened to in those Red Wall seats felt that the Labour Party wasn't their party anymore. Like them as working people, it wasn't their party anymore. And what they described to me was the party that they felt had been, and I'm literally quoting one of the interviews that I had here when I say this isn't my words, but that the Labour Party had been taken over by a load of snooty graduates who looked down their noses at people like them. And that you know, that was something that came so vividly through a lot of the interviews that I did. And I thought was, in some ways, one of the sort of saddest things that I heard was just this sense that the Labour Party was no longer a party for ordinary working people. And, you know, you're saying you were welcomed. But obviously some of those people didn't feel welcome. And I'm wondering how you think Labour can address that and reach out again to those people. And in particular, one thing I would say is, for you as somebody who's manifestly not a snooty middle-class graduate, what's the role that you can play personally in reaching out to some of those Red Wall voters? No pressure.
No pressure. I think, you know what, I think the thing is, and one of the things that we're doing, and hopefully people will get involved in, is getting different CLPs to a phone bank. It's so important. I've been speaking to voters today. Like, speak to voters. If you're an activist, you've got to speak to voters, first of all, because if you think you know them, you don't. If you think you know the so-called Red Wallers, you don't, because they're all different. Let me tell you, Lisa Nandy's constituency is not the same as mine. And, you know, it's so true. And we're not a homogenous group. And that's what Labour understood at one time. Yeah. Is that but the values that overarch what we do is about trying to support each other, and that we've got key values and red lines. You don't have to be all things to all people, because people can disagree with us on issues, but at least they know where we stand. They felt we were a bit Magnolia. We're trying to ride two horses all the time. They're quite happy with us riding one. They just want to know what the horse is. They don't even know they understood what we were riding at the time. So I think the most important thing that we all have to do, first of all, is speak to voters. If there's one thing I can say on this call, is
get out there.
Get it out there. You know, ring someone. Ring your mate from who you've not spoke to for years. There's a thing. Somebody put an idea in my head about call home, because a lot of people, especially people who live in London now or in big cities, used to live in the town or grew up in a town. So we had this thing called call home, which hopefully we'll be able to do, where, you know, you can go back to where you was born and bred and just sort of do a bit of phone banking there. But, you know, I think it's so
a great idea. That's a fantastic idea.
Because then you feel like it's nostalgic. It's a place you grew up in, but you'll also see where things are now. And like I said before, you know, I consider myself to have had a really poor upbringing, but I literally did have a council house. I had a gyro. My parents didn't have to go to a food bank. I had free education. I could go to college for free. I could go back to college when I'd had my baby. And, you know, all of those things now, they're not there for the poor. So actually, I'm out of touch with the poor compared to what I was. So if I think the poor is what I grew up in and my experience, it's so wrong to how things are for people today. Just like people have a certain idea about middle class and professionals. Well, you've got that job, so you must be loaded, or you must have this. And I think if we can actually break down some of those barriers by speaking to people and then listening to what they say, they're the same values that have kept the Labour Party going through decades, actually. And they're the ones that will get us into government again. We've got to speak to the 21st century and talk about their lives and include them. It's not somebody else's son. It's not somebody else's daughter. It's not somebody else's life. They have to have a voice in the Labour Party. It can't just be one particular group from one particular place. And that's kind of some of the work I've been doing around our candidate selection. is trying to open it out. If you don't think you should be a Labour councillor or a Labour MP, you're exactly the person I want.
That's such a good point, because that again was something that came through, you know, in the red wall seats that I was in. A lot of people felt that, you know, what had happened was that the Labour Party had parachuted in, you know, somebody who'd been, you know, an Oxford graduate, who'd been a sort of special advisor or whatever, who, you know, who didn't come from the area, didn't take the trouble to get to know it, sort of went out there once a month, and then the rest of the time had staff. And it's, you know, it's a real issue, isn't it? It's a real problem that it's something that, I mean, the unions, I think, could maybe help more with as well, kind of connecting back into the workplaces, into the local communities. Can we learn from somebody like Marcus Rashford, who you would have to pull out as being the outstanding campaigner of our time? How can we learn from him?
Yeah, we can learn from him, Deborah. And I'm dead, you know, my mum's from Wythenshawe, and, you know, and Marcus is a Wythenshawe lad, and I grew up out there.
I grew up in Cheadle-Hulme.
Hey, you were posh, Deborah, compared
so
to
posh.
Else.
So posh.
That's what I say to Owen Jones, because both me and him were
he was very posh,
and he was in Kale Green, and we have this. It's rather parochial, but Londoners on here, they'll know if you say South London's the same as North London and stuff. You know,
it's exactly.
It's a little parochial, but it's how we roll. But you know, what was it you asked me again? I've completely lost. Where was Marcus?
Marcus.
And how amazing he is.
You got distracted by
yes, we can. We can learn from people like Marcus, and that's about not telling people, lecturing people. Actually, sometimes, you know, and I found the best activisms from the bottom up, and it's the same with trade unions as well. The best activism is from the bottom up. So I did my best work as a trade union organizer when I was a home help in the workplace, working with my colleagues. And again, that's kind of what we've got to do. And it works with the constitution. Everything else is pushing power down. And it's like my job now is not to tell people what to do. My job is to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because like that is so important. And then empower. Yeah. So that's why I don't know if there's a theme here that I keep saying, and that's about telling people to speak up. And if you think that you're not the right person to speak, you definitely are. And then not only that, reach out. So reach out to people, and those people who you think won't vote for us, or who you've got you might think are a certain way, don't think like that. You know, I did a selection in Didsbury, and I saw this house. It was massive. It was obviously
now Didsbury is properly posh.
He's like properly posh, yeah. And I thought, honestly, Deborah, I thought these ain't going to vote for me. It was an internal selection, and there were members of the Labour Party, and I thought they're not going to go for me. I can't even say my T's right, so I say party, not party. So I thought there's no way they're going to go for me. And I knocked on the door, and this gent opened the door, and I was really nervous because I thought there's not a chance in hell he's going to have anything. He's going to vote for the other person who's better than me. And I spoke to him for about 10 minutes or so, and he started getting all emotional. And I thought, oh, what have I done? And he said, you remind me of my mum.
Oh, wow.
My mum was a single mum. She brought me up, you know, and I've done well for myself. I've worked hard, and she did everything for me. That's why he was a Labour person. Yeah. And I assumed, he's not going to have anything in common with me. He's not going to want me, da-di-da-di-da. And I was so wrong. This guy was just emotionally connected in a way that I could never have believed that would have been the case. So again, it's just like reaching out and speaking to people and not presuming. And I think if we get back to that, I'd wipe all of our voter ID, to be honest. I don't think we should give people any idea of what people vote for.
Yeah.
And then they're just cold call, literally, this is a person's name, just say hello to them. And then see where it goes. Yeah, exactly. Rather than assuming, this person must be this way.
Yeah, that's so true. And stop talking to ourselves and start listening to voters and talking to voters. Now, I completely agree. And I mean, like a lot of people on this call, I will have sat through an awful lot of Labour Party, particularly now they're even more deadly when they're on Zoom meetings. Sorry, guys, but, you know, just get out there and talk to people instead. Now, we've got a lot of people wanting to ask questions. And I think the idea is that people are going to ask their own questions. They're going to pop up and we're going to see them. So let's get a few. So I'm going to start with Stephen Wilkinson has a question. I'm told there's a little bit of a delay whilst we wait for him to appear. So I think Stephen is ready to come in. Here he is. Great.
I think I'm on now.
You are, yeah.
You
Hi.
Okay. I wanted to ask. I'm deeply concerned about. I'm a CLP member. I'm an active CLP participant. I get deeply concerned about the factionalism that's going on in the party at the moment. It is saddening, actually. I've been a party member for nearly 35 years, and I've never known it this bad. And I want to know whether Angela and Keir, whether there's a strategy, whether we're just going to hope this kind of fades away, or whether there will be not necessarily some Neil Kinnock battle, but a way of actually articulating what are extremely sensible and, from my point of view, could be very popular Labour policies and ideas. And we need to get through to the public as much as we do to our membership. That's a worry.
This is such an important point, isn't it, Stephen? And in fact, again, sorry to keep dragging in my focus group people, but often what they say is just so true. One woman said to me in a focus group the other day, I asked about Keir, and she said, well, think about Keir Starmer. He's quite like Priti Patel, isn't he? And I'm like, really? Talk me through that. I don't understand. And she said, well, the trouble is he's got so much, kind of infighting, like his own problems to sort out, that he can't get on and deal with people like us. And she meant sort out the party. And I thought, oh, wow. So, Angela, what's the answer?
Yeah, Stephen, thanks for the question, and thanks for all that you do. I've been frustrated by this. And the thing that I've always done, and I've always tried to pride myself on the fact that I'm non-factional. I love Labour. I love every bit of it. I love every Labour leader we've had, and I've tried my best to get every single one of them to be the Prime Minister, because at the end of the day, it's not perfect, but it's given me opportunities that my mum never had. And I know that without Labour, I wouldn't be where I am today, not just in terms of being a member of Parliament, but actually being able to hug my children and tell them I love them in a way that my mum could never do, because she didn't understand, or she never had that when she was young. So that's the power of what we do. That's what I say to people when they go into a room, whatever they're doing in the Labour Party. If you're moving us away from changing people's lives, if you're busy attacking each other, not being constructive, we have different of opinions. Of course we do. I have different of opinions with Keir. But if what I'm doing is taking him away from being the next Prime Minister, why am I here? Why am I doing it? Because we're all active in the Labour Party because we believe something's triggered it. Whether it's that guy who's in a really nice house now in Didsbury, whose mum was a single mum, whether it's me, who was a pregnant teenager, whether we've all got our story of why we're in the party. And believe me, you wouldn't be in it for the fun, would you? I was going to say the kicks, but like literally it feels physically at times like you are getting kicked. But it's because we want to see a Labour government, and we've got to make sure we love each other and look after and respect each other. And if you can't do that, this party's not for you. And if you behaviours which are not acceptable that I've seen, we're already putting systems in place to stop that, because it's not acceptable. Some of the behaviours and the toxic culture that I've seen in the Labour Party, quite frankly, I am astonished. I would have never seen it or tolerated it in a workplace as a union rep. And I wouldn't do it in a pub, in the local boozer with my mates. So the idea that people come along to meetings and abuse each other or have lack of respect for each other, I don't care what shade of red you are, is completely unacceptable and will not be acceptable undermining Keir's leadership. Because what we want to do is we can disagree respectfully, but what we've got to do is move to get us into government, because otherwise we're just bald men fighting over a comb. That's it. We're never going to be able to change people's lives. We're never going to be able to feed those kids. We've got this campaign on Monday. We're going to vote on Monday. We've got the opposition day debates on Monday about free school meals, and we just talked about Marcus. Do you know what? It's not in our gift. It's not in our gift. We could lose. It's no fun. I sit here now and I know we've done everything I can, but unless you get me into government, I can't feed those kids. That's what's at stake, and that's what everyone has to remember.
Well said. I think that's, really, I can see actually my chat line, I can see lots of people cheering and doing a little sort of applauding symbol. But yes, I think it's keeping your eye on the prize, isn't it? It's really sort of focusing. So I think next up we've got somebody called Liz Hind. Liz, can we bring Liz in, please? Yes, people liked your bald men fighting over a comb. I've never heard that before. I love it. Here's Liz. We can see LH, but we can't see you, Liz.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, though, yes.
Oh, it's all right. I've been on the sofa all day. My hair's all over the place, so it's probably best that you can't see me.
You look lovely.
I mean, the question that I've got is, you were talking about getting into people's spaces, and you're also another comment talking about small business. So how, as a party, do we get into that small business space and do what earlier speakers were talking about, of being, pro-business, but pro-business that's also pro-worker, and businesses that can support their workers?
Brilliant question. Thank you. And speaking as somebody who runs a small business, very, very close to my heart. And I think also the other thing I'd add there, which I mean, everybody knows, of course, is that like small businesses are the ones that have suffered most in the pandemic, often had the least help and least support. And actually, you were talking, Angela, about us all being much more in touch with our local communities. We're much more aware of our local community businesses too. Often it's, particularly in that first lockdown, it was those small shops that really helped us all out. Yes. So what can Labour do, and how can Labour get back to being a party that supports business in that way?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. And I think this is really crucial and important. And, I remember reading in your book about the woman who had the sandwich shop in Accrington.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I could sense how she felt. And it was that she'd worked so hard. Like, people assume that if you've got a business, that you've got loads of money in that, and literally she was just on her knees and trying to look after an elderly father and everything else. We've got to start talking about, we talk about big business and corporations, and we talk about it negatively, they don't pay tax and that, but we're not talking about the backbone of our economy, which is the small and medium businesses, and they went out feeding the homeless. They were out, they opened their doors to help and support. Again, look at the work that Andy Burnham did, which I think was brilliant, when he pushed for the business rate relief, and that the big businesses like Tesco's and others giving it back. I mean, the government were failing on this. They've not been looking at how they can innovate for the state to support the government have stepped in, and that's right. They had to step in because of the public health and the pandemic. But there's some businesses that have done really well because of we've had to step in and we've changed the market. But we've not been able to then move that and shift that support to where it's needed the most, like the 3 million self-employed that have just been completely forgotten about. So what we've been trying to do is really push that message, and it's telling that story. Because a lot of the time, and I'm going to say it, and it's probably going to upset people, but Thatcher was able to do it because her dad's a small business owner. Yes. She told the story behind the business and what it's like. And I remember when I was 18, I set up my own little business selling flowers, and I employed 2 of my mates, and I was petrified because suddenly I had to do all these things which I wasn't aware of I had to do. Then I was worried about not my wages, but the 2 people who I was employing and how they were going to be able to feed their kids and making sure they had the money. So I think a lot of the time it's about being able to connect and tell the story, the human story behind business and the work that they do, and then really pushing the government to see how they can put that support in place. Because at the moment, as people have quite rightly said, it's like a blunt instrument at the moment they're using. It's like a blunt sledgehammer, and it's inconsistent and last minute. And all of those things are saying, we don't understand. We don't understand business. We don't understand your lives, and we don't understand the struggles that you have. And I think it's telling that human story. I mean, you would hear me say that because that's kind of my bread and butter. That's if you ask me what I do, I don't do the forensic. I take what the forensic economic argument is, and I'll tell the story about the guy who's struggling to look after his kids, to keep the shop open, and to see where his suppliers are, and etc. etc. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to think about, well, who is the small business owner, and what is it that what's their day-to-day like, and how do we improve it at the moment. And we're not talking about it enough in that way to capture people's imaginations and then to bring about that change. A lot of the time in business, people talk about in numbers, and that's not the way to really connect with people, to understand what needs to change to help our economy. And that our economy the economy is propped up by small and medium businesses, not just by the big multinationals that people hear about.
I think that's right. And it's not just about the pandemic either, as well, of course. It's also about thinking about what we do beyond that, and how we, that whole Build Back Better thing, and how you can put small businesses, as you say, as the sort of backbone, really, of the economy.
Yeah, I was excited when we were told do you remember Cameron's government said we'll have localism? Yeah. And they said we'll have this idea, and the principle behind it about letting small and medium businesses be able to procure for public contracts and things, and work within the voluntary sector was, you could say fair play. If there's a local sandwich shop, why shouldn't they be able to provide a local school with the school meals, for example? And why is there bureaucracy that stops that from happening? But actually, what they did was they didn't understand it, what they actually did was make it harder for those community businesses to help in the way they want to. And that's what I'd love to see us do, is really genuinely understand how these businesses work and how we can help grow them and how we can support them to do what we need to do as a society. And as our future planning for things like green energy, we should be pushing and helping these small hubs. They just don't, that's how you get the innovation, and you have to take risk, and the state can take that risk in a way that some businesses won't invest and banks won't invest. And therefore we should be thinking about that and how we can energize the market into looking at new businesses and new ways of working that will face the challenges of tomorrow, rather than harping on about the past. Is what are the future challenges, and how do we get on top of that and save the world? We're saving the world with a vaccine. Oxford AstraZeneca. How have we?
So if we're smart enough to figure that out,
exactly. But we should be encouraging more of that, especially with our innovators. And at the moment, we're not doing that. We're not doing enough of that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, next up we've got Matt Dent. I think Matt. Here he is. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, we can hear you and we can see you.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I'm really enjoying this session. I think this is incredibly encouraging. I just want to say, as a councillor, I'm really impressed with how the new leadership have been engaging with and supporting Labour in local government. It's something I think has been absent for a long time, and the reluctance to celebrate what Labour achieves in local government has led to people finding it difficult to connect voting Labour with positive changes happening in their community. How do we translate Labour politics delivering in practice locally into support for Labour nationally? And how will the next Labour government, under yourself and Keir, empower and support councillors to make that local difference for our voters?
Matt, it's a crucial question, and first of all, thank you for what you're doing. And even when I was a union rep in local government, we had Gershon, best value, insourcing, outsourcing, right sourcing, JVC, Section 31, 75s, and all that. We had everything. Local government went through hell and back, and our councillors, throughout austerity, throughout this, have done everything they can to support their communities, and regardless of what political colour they are, I think councillors really do get a tough time. I really do. And I think our councillors in particular, because we've seen the way it's been disproportionately affecting deprived areas, have done a tremendous job. So first of all, I want to say thank you for what you're doing. And then the second thing comes back to that point I said at the beginning about the relationship that we have. It should be a peer-peer relationship. Again, far too often it's the top down. So when we had devolution in Greater Manchester, I remember when I was Shadow Education Secretary, I thought it was really important that we devolved more skills and that we embraced it and that we tried to get on top. The party was a bit behind that. And I think we are on constitutional reform as well. We're not quite where we need to be. And I know Keir recognises that as well. We should be pushing power down. And I'll give you one example. So, we've got Monica Lennon in Scotland. She's a local politician there. She came up with a period poverty. You know, she decided that in her local area, period poverty was a real issue and she wanted free sanitary products. That was something that she implemented locally, then ended up getting it done nationally in Scotland, and now it's across the United Kingdom. And that was from the bottom up. And we've got to celebrate where some of our local councils, like Leeds, they've been doing some really great stuff on the environment, and making sure that we roll out some great initiatives on how we can bring down emissions. So there's some really positive work that's going on. And I talked about movement generosity. And I know there's some other areas of the Labour Party, because I've been speaking to them recently, that have online platforms where shared ideas. Because, like, for example, in some areas, in some small towns, there's not that many members, but in some of our big city towns, they've got like thousands of members who have got all these expertise and know lots of stuff on different sort of things that we need, how we can link them up. So I want to see a platform where we link those up, we share ideas, and then we can steal them, basically. I can tell you the only reason I've been successful, because like I say, I've got no GCSEs or anything like that. I'm successful because I literally steal people's ideas. I tell them and I give them the credit for it. And like I'm saying now, I've not, like all these things about phone home and everything, like I said, it's not come from me. I just listen. And I listen to what people say and I think that is amazing. Wow. You are a hero. So that's what we need to do is see what's going on the ground and then magnify it and share it, celebrate it.
Steal with pride. One of my first bosses said to me, steal with pride. Can I just add as well to this, how much this matters for anybody who's listening, who's a local councillor? Boy, you matter, because when Labour has been out of power and out of government for a long time, and it's something, again, I learned from the work that I did for the Red Wall book, people look at what's happening in their local council and their local councillors, and that's how they think. If Labour happens to be running that council, they think that's how you'll run the country. So it really, really matters.
And it's the small things, Deborah, as well. Do you know what I mean?
So
it's small things. Just like some of our local councillors literally hold our party together. They are the Labour Party. People know us that. Yeah. Jim, who's been the councillor for 20 odd years, everyone knows Jim. He's there. He does his bit for the community. He's had the bins emptied. He's got the local park improved. They are happy as ever because of that. That's what counts, is that people know you're on their side and you're local and you're visible. And they are the Labour Party. They don't know who me and Keir is, but they'll know who's there. They'll know. Yeah, exactly. If you're visible on the ground, they know you, especially when, you might have helped them out if it's to do with the kid having problems at school or whatever. Just the little things matter a hell of a lot to people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I knew this session was going to fly by, and it bloody has. It's sort of, it feels like it's like a second ago that we were just getting going, and we actually have run out of time. So I think we're going to have to end. Thank you to everybody for their questions and for coming along. I've got one last question for you, Angela, from me. Which is this, that, Keir this morning said this was his 5th Fabian New Year conference. I feel it's my 25th, actually, probably. But I'm thinking, imagine that we were having this conversation in a year's time. If they were to ask us back, we did this again. What would you like Labour to have achieved in that year? So in a year's time, we're January 2022. What would you like to be looking back on this year and think, this is what we've done?
For everyone in the Labour Party to be talking positively about the Labour Party. That's what I think will be.
Okay. That is great. That is great.
Everyone in the Labour Party will be talking positively about the Labour Party with a smile on their face, saying, I'm part of a great movement and we're doing great things.
That is great. I was going to say be doing a little bit better in the polls, but you know what? That's probably one of the best routes to getting there, I would say.
Exactly. That will be a measure of that, Deborah.
Exactly. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. I'm going to hand back to Andrew, who I think is going to close off today's session.
Yeah, just to say a huge thank you to both Deborah and Angela for, as you say, that raced by, and didn't we get a lot out of it? Some really important words from you, Angela, particularly about unity in the party. So there's more tomorrow. First time ever, we're doing a 2-day conference. So thank you all for your brilliant contributions today. And we'll be back from 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, starting off with a keynote speech from Nick Thomas-Symonds, Shadow Home Secretary, some other great Labour speakers across the day. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you then. And I hope you have a good night, and don't watch too much screen between now and then. See you tomorrow.
Great.